A Christian revival across the country. Bible sales increasing over 40% since 2022. Religion app downloads surging nearly 80%. And Christian music Spotify streams up 50% from 2019.
Why are they going to Orthodox church more than the evangelical church? I'm evangelical. I'll say, well, first of all, they want something that has lasted. They want something that is ancient and that is beautiful. Something that has stood the test of time. Something that's not going to change.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The United States and all of Western civilization has been profoundly shaped by the extraordinary achievements of the Greek people, stretching all the way back to ancient times, long time.
Christian revival across the country. Bible sales increasing over 40% since 2022. Religion app downloads surging nearly 80%. And Christian music Spotify streams up 50% from 2019.
Why are they going to Orthodox church more than the evangelical church? I'm evangelical. I'll say, well, first of all, they want something that has lasted. They want something that is ancient and that is beautiful. Something that has stood the test of time. Something that's not going to change.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The United States and all of Western civilization has been profoundly shaped by the extraordinary achievements of the Greek people, stretching all the way back to ancient times, long time.
Christian revival across the country. Bible sales increasing over 40% since 2022. Religion app downloads surging nearly 80%. And Christian music Spotify streams up 50% from 2019.
Why are they going to Orthodox church more than the evangelical church? I'm evangelical. I'll say, well, first of all, they want something that has lasted. They want something that is ancient and that is beautiful. Something that has stood the test of time. Something that's not going to change.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The United States and all of Western civilization has been profoundly shaped by the extraordinary achievements of the Greek people, stretching all the way back to ancient times, long time.
Christian revival across the country. Bible sales increasing over 40% since 2022. Religion app downloads surging nearly 80%. And Christian music Spotify streams up 50% from 2019.
Why are they going to Orthodox church more than the evangelical church? I'm evangelical. I'll say, well, first of all, they want something that has lasted. They want something that is ancient and that is beautiful. Something that has stood the test of time. Something that's not going to change.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The United States and all of Western civilization has been profoundly shaped by the extraordinary achievements of the Greek people, stretching all the way back to ancient times, long time.
A Christian revival across the country. Bible sales increasing over 40% since 2022. Religion app downloads surging nearly 80%. And Christian music Spotify streams up 50% from 2019.
Why are they going to Orthodox church more than the evangelical church? I'm evangelical. I'll say, well, first of all, they want something that has lasted. They want something that is ancient and that is beautiful, something that has stood the test of time, something that's not going to change.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
The United States and all of Western civilization has been profoundly shaped by the extraordinary achievements of the Greek people, stretching all the way back to ancient times, long time.
A Christian revival across the country. Bible sales increasing over 40% since 2022. Religion app downloads surging nearly 80%. And Christian music Spotify streams up 50% from 2019.
Why are they going to Orthodox church more than the evangelical church? I'm evangelical. I'll say, well, first of all, they want something that has lasted. They want something that is ancient and that is beautiful, something that has stood the test of time, something that's not going to change.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
The United States and all of Western civilization has been profoundly shaped by the extraordinary achievements of the Greek people, stretching all the way back to ancient times, long time.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to American Orthodoxy. I'm your host, as always, Benjamin Michael. Thank you for joining me today. We just had a massive weekend with my debate with old Brian Shapiro, Jewish man Brian Shapiro. Guys, if you haven't watched that debate, it's posted right here on my channel. If you head over to my videos, I only have 2 videos posted. One is my back and forth with Islamic Apex, and the other is my debate with Brian Shapiro. I will probably, Thursday, what my plan is I want to react to it if the Fuentes-Hunter Biden video is not dropped. So right now, my plan, the reason why I'm doing 2 reaction streams this week is because there's so much going on. I want to give Jay, I want to, help kind of bring exposure to his interview with Tucker. So we're going to be going over that today, as well as a couple other things. I want to go over some stuff about Andrew Jackson that I want to show you guys, because you guys know he's my favorite president. I want to show you just how badass he actually was. Of course, some big news this week. Lindsey Graham has croaked. God have mercy on his soul. Guys, we should be praying for the souls of our enemies. So be sure to be praying for his soul. I sound tired. I'm actually not tired. I got some good rest last night. There was like a troll in my comments like a couple weeks ago. He was like, bro, you look terrible. Are you getting enough sleep? I don't know. You guys tell me. Do I look terrible? Maybe I'm cooked. Guys, maybe I'm cooked. I don't know, okay? I asked some people near and dear to me. I was like, chat, am I cooked? And they told me, and these are people that are usually brutally honest. They said, no, you're not cooked. So, hey, I think it was a troll comment, but you guys let me know. All right? Let me know if I need to be getting more sleep. All right? Maybe that's the problem. I don't know. All right? I don't know what's going on. But hey, so we got a lot going on this week. Of course, with the Lindsey Graham situation, that means there's probably going to be a special primary. Lord willing, Mark Lynch will run again. Mark Lynch is pretty solid. He's the one who literally called for the return of Constantinople back to the Greeks and the Hagia Sophia. So that was pretty sick. Lord willing, he will get elected into Lindsey Graham's place. But once again, guys, pray for the soul of Lindsey Graham. Pray for the soul of Lindsey Graham. Please like the live and subscribe, guys. We've been on fire lately. With my last stream, we hit like 340 viewers at one point. And then my debate with Brian Shapiro is cooking on the algorithm right now. So once again, guys, if you haven't seen it, head over my videos. It was super fun. It honestly was more like a comedy skit. All right. It was pretty funny. All that being said, please like and subscribe, guys. So I want to show you this insane post. I thought this was an excellent summary of Andrew Jackson and his incredible presidency. This guy was just like a certified badass. I can't even like oversell how much of a badass this guy was. I can't even oversell it. Okay. So he was the 7th president. And a lot of people know, he went by, or he was called Old Hickory. That was sort of his nickname. This guy survived, guys. He survived 100 duels. 100 duels. Over 100 duels, actually. And he carried multiple bullets in his body for the rest of his life. Now, you guys have heard me talk about Teddy. Teddy is one of my other top 3 favorite presidents. Teddy took a bullet while he was giving a speech. And then he goes, "It appears I've been shot." And then he continues his speech. So Teddy is also the GOAT. But this is another level, bro. 100 duels, and he carried bullets in his body the rest of his life. That's pretty insane. Pretty insane. His most famous duel was essentially a planned murder in a duel with Charles Dickinson. Jackson let Dickinson shoot first, took a bullet near the heart, stayed standing, calmly aimed, and then killed him. After the duel, Jackson said, "If he had shot me through the brain, sir, I still should have killed him." Absolute gangster shit. Absolute gangster shit, bro. This is crazy. It gets crazier and crazier. Every one of these slides, guys, gets crazier and crazier. He beat an assassin with his cane. In 1835, a gunman tried to shoot him with 2 pistols. By the way, he lived until he was like 78. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for reminding me. Oh my gosh. I need to make sure I go over Paulo, who is a dear brother who sent me a super chat that I forgot to read last week. My bad, dude. I had a personal phone call with him on Saturday to answer his question, but I also want to answer it publicly because he did send that super chat in. I totally missed it. I don't know how I freaking missed it. But anyways, so both this assassin's guns misfired, and Jackson at 67 years old, just noticed that, by the way. Grown-ass man, by the way. 67 years old, charged him and began beating him with his cane. So at 67 years old, bro, that's y'all's grandma and grandpas, bro. My parents are 60 this year. So, my grandma is in her like 80s. Bro, 67 years old, he's out here beating MFs with his freaking cane who are trying to kill him. By the way, like an absolute miracle, obviously. The fact that the guy's gun misfired twice. This one is hilarious, bro. His parrot had to be removed from his funeral for cursing. During Jackson's funeral, his pet parrot, Polly, started yelling profanity loud enough to disrupt the service. Bro. That's gonna be Andrew Wilson's parrot one day. Anyone who watches Andrew Wilson knows probably has the same mouth that Andrew Jackson had, based on this little bit of information right here. Love Andrew Wilson, by the way, and Rachel. Rachel is one of the biggest supporters of my platform. She's the one who got me on Tim Pool, and basically is the one who got me my debate with Brian Shapiro through that. By the way, guys, oh my goodness, if you haven't seen the clips, I almost want to play some of them. I think I'm just going to do a full react. Hey guys, look, if the Fuentes thing, this is what we'll do. All right. If the Fuentes-Hunter Biden thing drops before Thursday, we'll do that. And then Saturday, I'll react to my Brian Shapiro stream. How about that? Does that sound good? If the Fuentes-Hunter Biden thing does not drop by Thursday, I'll do that Saturday, and I'll do the Brian Shapiro thing on Thursday. So this just keeps getting wilder and wilder. He was slashed in the face by a British officer as a child, captured during the American Revolution at age 13. Age 13. Andrew Jackson refused to shine an officer's boots. Based. The officer struck him with a sword, leaving lifelong scars. That's just badass, bro. Grown-ass man, and you don't have scars. I got scars. Bro, if you don't have scars, come on, man. What are we doing here? Threatened to... This one... This is crazy. He threatened to hang his own vice president during the nullification crisis. Jackson publicly said he'd hang Vice President John Calhoun from the first tree if he pushed secession. Jackson also famously said, if John Calhoun secedes from my admin, I will secede his head from the rest of his body. Can you imagine a president today doing this? Literally threatening to hang his own vice president, bro. This dude is built different. His inauguration turned into a violent, drunken riot. Thousands of supporters stormed the White House, breaking furniture and china. Staff had to lure the crowd outside with tubs of whiskey to restore order. Bro, this is peak America. This has got to be peak America right here, bro. Do you know how much, like, the vibes of that right there, bro, would be just immaculate. Just immaculate vibes. Immaculate vibes. A New York farmer gifted Andrew Jackson a 1,400-pound wheel of cheese on his last day as president. Jackson opened the White House to the public, invited everyone to eat it. Thousands came. The White House reportedly smelled like cheese for weeks afterward. He was a president of the people. Guys, that's how Teddy was too. Teddy used to do crazy shit like this in the White House as well. So that's what I'm saying. These guys are cut from the same cloth. That's why I like both of them. And then JFK is kind of like in his own world. JFK just had crazy aura, bro. JFK just had like insane aura. That's why I love JFK. So guys, Andrew Jackson, a lot of people don't know a lot about him. Oh, by the way, Trail of Tears, total bullshit. Total bullshit. Go watch Matt Walsh's breakdown of the Trail of Tears and all of the so-called genocide that white people committed against indigenous populations. It's basically all bullshit. So go give that a watch if you don't believe me. The Trail of Tears is literally total nonsense. It's total freaking nonsense. So, anyways, let me see if I can do something here.
Range.
Well, aren't you a Jewish man?
Well, yeah,
I didn't know.
but
I didn't know you were. Are you ashamed of being Jewish?
Why would I say I'm ashamed of?
Why is it? I wanted to play from the beginning. Hang on a second. This is one of the clips I wanted to show you guys. By the way, I'm so glad I remembered to do this. I'm so good. Open up the phones. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe I'll do call-ins on Saturday. I don't know. Because my debate with Brian Shapiro was only like 45 minutes long. So maybe I'll open up calls on Saturday. I haven't done calls in a while. It's because last time I did it, nobody wanted to freaking call in. All right, so guys, so first of all, my Instagram group chat is now maxed out. So I found out yesterday you can only have 250 people in an Instagram group chat. What the hell? What the hell? It's bullshit. So I'm totally maxed out. Unfortunately, I have 250 people in my Instagram group chat. However, go to my Instagram, go to my bio, and right here is my Telegram, my brand new Telegram chat that I just started yesterday. And in this chat, guys, my Instagram chat was literally popping 24/7. 24/7, there's people in there yapping away about politics, a little bit about theology, but mostly politics. So the goal is for the Telegram to be the same way. So if you have Telegram, head over to my Instagram here and actually Copy link. Let me put this in the comments for you guys as well, so that oh, it's gonna be stupid. Hang on, let me try to do this better. It's giving the Instagram link. Let me do it so that it gives the actual Telegram link here. Bro, what are you talking about? All right, there's the actual Telegram link. So if you guys want to join up to the Telegram chat, please do. All right. All right, I'll show one of these clips. I want to go over like this whole thing. On like I said, on either Thursday or Saturday. But I'll show you guys this clip here.
Man, I just thought that was a little strange.
Well, aren't you a Jewish man?
Well, yeah,
I didn't know.
but
I didn't know you were. Are you ashamed of being Jewish?
Why would I say I'm ashamed of it? We were talking in the car on the way to the Tim Pool show, and you asked me about my religion, and what did I tell you?
You said that you're kind of secular. You don't really
I'm not a
abide by religion. But you're ethnically. Are you ethnically Jewish?
Yeah, and I'm not ashamed of it. Why would you think I'm ashamed of it? All I'm simply saying is,
then why do you have an issue with me saying that you're Jewish? I don't understand.
I think it's very strange because when I introduce people on my show, I've never introduced them by their religion. Nobody has ever done that to me.
Well, it's not just a religion; it's an ethnicity too.
Okay, well, whatever. But I don't introduce people as black man, blah 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 blah, white man, blah 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 blah.
You can if you want. I'm not ashamed of being a white man. I'm a white man.
It's not an issue of whether you can, you can't. I never said you couldn't. I'm just saying it's very weird, and I'm trying to figure out why. Why is it?
I don't think it's weird.
Okay, but why is that? So that's how you introduce everybody in your life, by their religion?
Identity matters. I think that who you are ethnically, who you are religiously, who you are matters. I think that's relevant to conversations. It helps people understand historical background, context.
I don't think it's relevant to any of my opinions on anything. Why?
Guys, I had so much fun. If you have not seen that debate, bro, you guys gotta head up. It's right here on my channel, and it's popping on the algorithm. Finally, guys, maybe we're finally through the shadow ban. I don't know. Right now, my viewership is down because Jay is also live, literally, and I'm doing a stream on Jay's video, so that's probably why my viewership is so down right now. But guys, our last stream we were cooking. I think when we do our Fuentes stream, that one's going to be cooking. As always, I'll go over all super chats at the end. So if you want to support the show. Also, I do a members only live stream. I've been gaining a lot of new members lately. Thank you for the support. So if you're interested in being a member, please sign up. And I do members only live streams. And like and subscribe to live. Guys, I'm most active on my Instagram. If you are not following my Instagram, I'm about to hit 60K over there. If you are not following my Instagram, you should download Instagram just so you can follow me, bro. Because that's where I'm posting most of my stuff. All right. Thanks for the super chats. As always, I'll go over all of them at the end. All right, let's dive into this. We're going to be playing at 1.25 speed. Let's do it. And by the way, you guys know I love Tucker. I love Tucker. Tucker is a little bit too friendly. He's a little bit too friendly to the old muzzies for my taste. But I love Tucker, guys. I think he's a pure-blooded American. I think he's an American patriot. I think he's doing a lot of good things. And glory to God, he's had all these Orthodox Christians on. He had Father Stephen DeYoung. He had Mother Agapia. He had John Kiriakou, which, by the way, did you guys know John Kiriakou's Orthodox? John Kiriakou is a Greek Orthodox Christian. He's actually very devout. I believe his patron is St. Nectarios because he carries around an icon of St. Nectarios. And by the way, if you guys haven't seen the movie Man of God, you have to go see the movie Man of God. All right, that being said, let's dive in.
Dyer, thank you very much for doing this. I have a lot of questions to ask you, but I want to begin with Orthodoxy. You are one of the most visible and maybe effective evangelists for Orthodoxy, Christian Orthodoxy, certainly in your age cohort, maybe in the country. You're Orthodox. Why are you Orthodox?
Which, by the way, guys, is why I will never... Listen, people can criticize Jay for this, that, and the other. You can't criticize the results. The results are undeniable. The results are absolutely undeniable. Jay Dyer is the most effective evangelist for the Orthodox Church in really, the entire internet era. In the entire internet era, he's the most effective evangelist for the Orthodox Church. So that's why we love Jay. Even if you disagree with some opinions he has or some of the ways he goes about things, guys, you cannot deny the results. You go to any parish in the United States, and 80% of the young men that are there, which is the majority of the converts, are there because of Jay.
So what is Orthodoxy?
I'm Orthodox because I went through a long journey trying to figure out what authentic Christianity is. And so I was raised Baptist. That took me eventually into Catholicism when I was about 20, 21, I think. I read St Augustine's City of God. I read a bunch of his other works. And I thought, well, Baptist isn't right because I'm finding in the Church Fathers all these teachings that are not Baptist. And so that kind of gradually took me in the realm of traditional Roman Catholicism. Did that for a long time. And as you get into, I think, the more recent problems of Vatican II, post-Vatican II theology, that led me to the question of how do I reconcile this with what I know the first 1,000 years of Christianity teaches. So long story short, it took me about 8 or 10 years. I finally came to the Orthodox Church about 10 years ago. So
it's always funny how many people, because like I have a similar story with like reading St. Augustine. Like it's funny how people will be like, they'll shit on St. Augustine, but in reality, like he is a reason why a lot of people become Orthodox, because you read his theology, right? And you find issues with reconciling it with Western theology. There are aspects of, like, for example, his ecclesiology is explicitly Orthodox, right? He blatantly says that and this is contrary to the popular belief that St. Augustine said, Rome has spoken, the case is closed. That's a made-up quote. It's actually a summary of a jurisdictional dispute within Rome's patriarchate, right? Girls Gone Bible should have me on. Do you guys know how crazy that would be? Oh my gosh. What would we even talk about? What would we even talk about if I went on Girls Gone Bible? Should I reach out? Guys, should I reach out to Girls Gone Bible? Talk about nationalism? Oh, you guys are funny. Anyways, locking in. Guys, I'm locking in. St. Augustine's ecclesiology, he explicitly says that if Rome makes an error, you can appeal to a plenary or universal council to supersede Rome. That is Orthodox ecclesiology. So he believed explicitly in apostolic succession. He believed that the Eucharist was the sacrament of unity. How can the Eucharist be the sacrament of unity if there's multiple Eucharists? This is why it is so important in the Orthodox understanding, right, that there's only one Eucharist. You can't have more than one Eucharist. That's insane, because it's literally the unifier of the church. What makes the church one, according to St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, is the Eucharist. So when St. Augustine says that the Eucharist is the sacrament of unity, that is incompatible with Western theology.
that's the simplest, quickest reason is because I think
the first 1,000 years of Christianity,
Yeah.
I think to most modern Christians, certainly American Christians, that's like a black hole. What does that even mean, the first 1,000 years of Christianity?
it's an area that we're not taught. I know that when I went to college, the only thing that we talked about from that whole period was like Augustine's Confessions and maybe one other book or two.
Then we have something called the Dark Ages, and nothing happens.
Nothing about Byzantium.
Didn't even exist. And then like these people called the Medicis make a ton of money in Italy and
Yeah,
stuff.
and I made this point on Inspiring Philosophies Live, guys. Byzantium is where we first get hospitals and universities. It was literally Europe before Europe. Byzantium they were the pioneers for basically all of what we would consider to be modern development, modern technology. It all started in Byzantium, right? I hate to break it to you guys. We owe it to the Italians and the Greeks. All right? I hate to say it as an Anglo. I hate to say it as a Germanic. It's true. We owe it to the Italians and the Greeks. They were crushing it over there during that time in Byzantium. Bro.
Funding beautiful art, and that's the beginning of
That's it,
civilization.
yeah. So I remember at college, I was like pressing the department, like, why don't we study some medieval stuff, some Byzantine stuff? And they were like, why should we? We don't care about that Christian stuff. So, I think there's probably a little bit of an intentional desire to suppress that for, American education, I think, is pretty much.
And by the way, on this point as well, St. Maximus, for example, was a prominent philosophical figure. So a lot of church fathers like St. Maximus, unfortunately Origen, who's not a church father, but he was influential to the church. And a lot of church fathers had a lot of respect for Origen. These were like respected philosophers, not just within Christendom. Like they were respected philosophers in general. And yet how many people are taught about St. Maximus the Confessor in school, right? Are you taught about him as a philosophical writer? And yet that was what he was considered at the time. So there's this gaping hole in history, right, of Orthodox writers that is just ignored in academia.
Brainwashing. So,
in one sentence, this might take between Constantine in the 4th century and the Renaissance, you had Christian civilization.
The most successful empire in history is the Byzantine Empire, from Constantine all the way up until the fall of Byzantium to the Muslims. So,
why do you say it's the most successful?
It's a common sort of academic assessment, just in terms of they flourished on a gold standard for a really long time. They started clipping the gold, money clipping, like the Roman Empire in the West had done before them, and other empires. So they fell prey to usury as well.
Yeah.
So they fell to a lot of the same issues that empires tend to fall to:
human weakness, like recognizable stuff,
degeneracy, all of that.
Yes.
Also, rabid nationalism had a tendency to break down empires as well. I like Spengler, and I think if you read Oswald Spengler, he talks about how there's kind of a life cycle. But I think the unique aspect of the Byzantine Empire was that it was...
Spengler mentioned, we've been going through his book in my group chat. So W. Spengler mentioned, I'm not sure what he means by rabid nationalism. Maybe what he means is there were within the empire, there were all of these almost like microcosms, right? There was all these different nationalities, because guys, back then a nation was just an ethnicity. Like that's what a nation was. It was a people. Okay. So when we get to the development of modern nation states, now they're trying to water that down, right? They're trying to say that people are just economic units that are interchangeable, which is utterly nonsensical. We talk about this all the time on my show. You cannot disconnect yourself from who you are. You are your ethnicity. That is part of who you are. It is part of your identity. And guess what? It is irrevocably tied to your nation, to the extent that they used to be considered just the same thing. Your nation and your ethnicity were just the same thing. They were interchangeable terms.
Explicitly Christian, based on Orthodox Christianity.
So maybe what he's saying is you have all these competing nations within the empire, right? Yeah, that's problematic. That is problematic when you have a bunch, because guess what? They're not united. So when you have all these different nations that have competing interests, yeah, that's problematic.
Metrics of
you have to, in order to have unity, right? You need to be under the same nation, right? Which means for the most part, you need to be like the same ethnicity. That's generally how unity works.
It is to be successful or flourishing. It flourished. But it did fall. And I think, again, I'm not trying to measure Christianity just on worldly success, but I do think it does play out in that way at times, right? If you're really based around Christ, if your theology or civilization is logocentric, then it's going to play out that way. You're just going to prosper because you're aligned with what's true. You're aligned with that transcendent source.
Right.
So anyway, for me, that journey ended up being eventually Orthodox Christianity.
But just real quick, back to the Byzantine Empire. Did you know it existed before? How many people are aware that there was a Byzantine Empire and know anything about its outlines?
Not many people.
Chat. How many of you guys knew? Wait, someone said saw a reel of that white person. Say white people don't exist. Yeah, real. Yeah, guys. Nicole Kreisberg had some things to say about white people and how, as fellow white people, we don't actually exist. All right. So you guys can go check out that reel that I posted over on Instagram. Guys, if you're not following me on Instagram, what are you doing?
The West, again, there is a very clear, especially if you take humanities courses, the way they're constructed in college and maybe even younger private type schools. Like you go from, you do the pre-Socratics, you do Plato and Aristotle, and then you do Augustine, maybe a Stoic or two, and then you jump to Descartes. So you skip that whole period. And not just to say Byzantium, but also, the Latin West was, explicitly Christian as well. I think it's intentionally overlooked. They don't want people reading what brilliant thinkers were doing in the Middle Ages, because this is where we get universities. Universities come out of Byzantium, they come out of the West. So do hospitals. So some of these very fundamental science itself actually comes out of that whole period. So, but we are taught, we think that, no, these are all post-Enlightenment, post-scientific revolution developments. They're not, they're medieval developments. So a lot of that's suppressed. A lot of that I had to kind of just read and learn on my own.
I mean, medieval is an adjective.
Someone asked if I'm into identity politics. I don't know what that means, but you are your identity. You are your identity. You cannot disconnect yourself from your identity. It is impossible. It is impossible. That is why, once again, guys, I pointed this out. That is why when people come to America, let's say some Haitians come to America, they stick with their fellow Haitians. That's why you have whole communities that are Haitian. That's why you have whole communities that are Hispanic, specifically that are Mexican. That's why you have whole communities that are Black communities, whole communities that are Nigerian communities. Guys, this is literally how the world works, generally speaking. Let me clarify what I mean by you can't disconnect yourself from your identity. In a general sense, you cannot. That's why this is a normative principle. Now, can you as an individual, right, intermarry with another ethnicity, experience ethnogenesis with that ethnicity, be absorbed into that ethnicity and that identity? Yes. Yes, you can. But guess what? Then you become that ethnicity, and your family, your ancestors become that ethnicity. That's what happened in America. That's why we have all this mixed bag of mostly Northern Western Europeans, plus the African population that were the descendants of slaves. Those are the two primary ethnicities, guys. So you have two different ethnogenesis that occurred. I don't know who this guy is. Open the phones. The Scriptures 5691. I can try to get my my call in set up. I've been having problems with my my control room. Let me see. Let me get this going and we can see what this guy has to say. But yeah, you can't disconnect yourself from your ethnicity, generally speaking.
But also an epithet that's medieval.
By design.
Throwing and quartering somebody. The Dark Ages, they were dark. Like
that's all Voltaire. That's all sort of an atheistic French Revolutionary attack on what came before, by design.
When did you learn that?
Well, I was really interested in medieval thought, scholastic theology in college in my 20s. And so I was reading Aquinas and reading all these guys as I had all these atheist professors who were constantly debating with them. I did a public debate my sophomore year with the atheist professor. So I would be reading all those guys, studying philosophy and history, and then debating with those guys, and then coming to my own conclusions about that stuff through just reading. So
interesting.
Guys, I'll do a call. Should I do a call and stream Saturday? I need to figure out. So I've been using this VDO Ninja or whatever. That was what I've been using for my call-ins, and it was not going well. So maybe I'll do a call-in stream. Maybe I'll use Twitter. I'll use Twitter on Saturday. How about that? I'll do a call-in stream on Saturday as kind of part of my react to my Brian Shapiro thing.
Interrupting your story.
No,
so that led you to Orthodoxy.
Long story short, yeah, roundabout way, I went from traditional Catholicism in my 20s to eventually, I took about 8 to 10 years to study Orthodox stuff pretty intensely. So that would be, because I put a lot of time into reading the Latin church fathers. So I was reading Jerome and Ambrose and a lot of Augustine's works. And then I realized I've never actually read the Eastern Church Fathers. And if you get into church history in that first millennium that you talked about, you realize that all of the 7/8 ecumenical councils of that first millennium, they're actually all had in the East. They're all called by the emperors, the Byzantine Emperor. They're not called by the Pope. Certainly the Pope was either there or had legates there, so the West was represented.
Yeah, and guys, Jay debated Fuentes on this, and Fuentes was like, all the ecumenical councils were called by the Pope. No, they weren't. Not a single one. Not a single ecumenical council was called by the Pope. In fact, he tried to call an ecumenical council in Lateran 649, and the church basically laughed at him for trying to do it without the emperor, because the emperor was the one who called ecumenical councils. And that was how things operated in the first 1,000 years. And what is traditionally known as the first 7 ecumenical councils, those are the core dogmas of Christianity, right? You had every patriarch represented, and it was called by the emperor. It was ratified by the emperor. So that is how ecclesiology worked in the first millennium, not centered around Rome. It was centered around the emperor and around a conciliar model.
But it was in its ethos, it was essentially Eastern and Eastern in its Orthodox theology. So I just decided to go on a long reading track of reading all of those guys as best I could for many, many years. So that would be like the Cappadocians, that would be Basil, the 2 Gregories, St. Cyril of Alexandria.
This is another point, is every single ecumenical council was driven by an Eastern father, guys. Every single one. Every single one. Nicaea 1, St. Athanasius. Constantinople 1, Cappadocians plus St. Athanasius. Right? Ephesus, St. Cyril. Chalcedon, St. Cyril again, for the most part. You read Chalcedon, bro, the whole council was about Cyril. It was his theology driving it. People were going to say, oh, it was St. Leo. St. Leo's tome was being compared with St. Cyril's the entire time. It was the entire center point of Chalcedon was St. Cyril's Christology, making sure that St. Leo's Christology was aligned with St. Cyril's. That was the entire point of the council. Constantinople II, St. Justinian. He was the primary driver of that council. Constantinople III, St. Maximus. Again, another Eastern father. Nicaea II, St. John of Damascus. Right? Every single council was driven by an Eastern father's theology.
Andrea, St. Maximus Confessor, St. John of Damascus, those are some of the key figures in that milieu of the first 1,000 years that set the tone of all of Christianity in terms of its most fundamental doctrines, the Trinity and Christology, right? That's what Christianity is. Those 2 doctrines are the key sort of linchpin that it all hangs on. So the first 1,000 years is dominated by those topics. And that, in a roundabout way, a lot of people don't realize this either, that actually conditions what type of Christianity you're going to have, how it's going to affect society, how it's going to affect your life.
Thanks for the super chats, as always, guys. I will go over all super chats at the end.
So, for example, if you have a very truncated version of, say, evangelicalism that's only based around just how you're saved, right? It's not going to affect society. And so those types of Christianities, or I would say deviations, they're also very susceptible to being used by other groups. I know you just had a guy on talking about evangelical Zionism and dispensational theology, because that theology is sort of based around an imminent, end of the world type scenario. You sort of retreat and you're not able to create a vibrant cultural effect of Christianity. That's by design. People figured that out. They were very cunning. A few centuries ago, they realized that that's the kind of Christianity that can be useful. So
that theology, which I'm not an expert in, but have heard a lot about in the last couple of years, is so totally incompatible with what the New Testament actually says that it makes you wonder, like, what kind of church could fall for that? And it would be a church with a pretty thin theology and and a structure that couldn't do anything about apostasy.
And it's also antithetical to the Christianity of the first 1,000 years. And the reason I keep saying the first 1,000 years is that that's not just where we get these doctrines of the Trinity and who Jesus is formulated, but we also get the Bible. The Bible itself comes out of decisions of church fathers centuries after the apostles.
Yes.
And guys, on this point, this refutes Rome too, by the way, because Rome, you get a closed canon at Trent. It took all the way up until Trent for Rome to close their canon. Guys, a closed canon is incompatible with the way that the church fathers understood the canon. Even someone like St. Jerome, who Protestants often cite as on their side with the canon, guys, he had a tiered understanding. St. Athanasius the same way. All of these church fathers that Protestants will cite for their 66-book canon, they all had a tiered understanding. You know how we know? Because they'll usually list a formal canon. Sometimes it's 66 books, sometimes it's 73, sometimes it's somewhere in between, right? But guess what? All of them still cite from what is known as the deuterocanonical texts found in the Septuagint, which in the Orthodox Study Bible, right, is 76 books. But guess what? In the Ethiopian Bible, it's 81. And those extra 5, like, for example, the book of Enoch. Guys, do we throw out the book of Enoch completely? Is it completely worthless? No. There is tradition that is valuable in the book of Enoch. Is it in the formal canon? No. No, it is not. However, under the tiered understanding of the books in the Bible, that's not a problem for us. We can accept the book. We can accept something like the Shepherd of Hermas, with which St. Athanasius says catechumens should read. So even though St. Athanasius says he gives the he doesn't include the Shepherd of Hermas, right? He gives us the 27-book New Testament. That's the first time we see the 27 books in the same place, is in a letter from St. Athanasius in the end of the 4th century. Guys, even though he's giving those 27 books, he's saying, oh, also there's these other books like the Shepherd of Hermas that can still be read by catechumens. Guys, that is a tiered understanding of the scriptures, and only Orthodoxy has a reconciliation for that. Not Rome. Rome doesn't have a reconciliation for that because they have a closed canon. Because the Orthodox Church has an open canon, we are the only ones that are actually aligned with the first millennium church and how they understood the canon. Because guess what the canon is? It's liturgical. That's what the books in the Bible are for. They're liturgical. That is their primary purpose. So this black and white view of, there's this line that we draw in the canon, that is incompatible with the church fathers, because all the way up until St. John of Damascus, you still have different canons. In fact, past St. John of Damascus, even in the West, guys, you have different canons. You have various cardinals that are giving different lists of canons. Why? Because even in the West, even post-schism, all the way up until Trent, you really have this understanding of a tiered system, at the top of which are the Gospels. Why is it that we only venerate the Gospels? Why is that the case? Why don't we venerate the epistles? Well, it's because the Gospels are in a unique tier of Scripture. They're a unique tier. That's why. Only Orthodoxy has an answer to this, guys. Not Rome, not Protestantism. The canon cooks everyone except for Orthodoxy. It was one of the biggest reasons I converted.
So if we're going to have a church or a religion based on the Bible, we really already truncate Christianity, because the Bible itself in our ethos is a liturgical document. It's actually part of a liturgy. It's not a personal devotional book primarily. So divorce it from that context, divorce it from the community that produced it, is what produces sort of aberrant, truncated versions of the religion that make it susceptible to princes, foreign governments, NGOs, think tanks, foundations. They become essentially tools of soft power, which is what I think much of the evangelical Protestant world today, not indicting the individuals, but the groups, the denominations, they're very easily bought off. For example, very wealthy families in the West, about 100 years ago, were able to buy off many of the mainline Protestant denominations and turn them into effectively NGOs. Just one example, the Rockefellers, and they're not the only family, but they're one of the families that invested very heavily in not just the UN, but also the World Council of Churches, to create a sort of a supra-international version of the UN that would be for religions. And they were very explicit in their biographies about how this was to basically make it kind of an NGO. So make Christianity into kind of a form of soft power for American interests, really oligarchical interests. And that's one of the
Welcome to the new viewers, guys. Please like and subscribe. Let's push this out to the algorithm. Let's get back to that 340 viewers I had last week. That was pretty dope. To be fair, it was an Alex Jones Sneeko debate, and we are going to probably have something similar when we do our Fuentes versus Hunter Biden debate. Even if was it a debate, or are they just like chatting? Are they like buddies? Do you guys see Clav has his girlfriend is literally in the IDF, guy, by the way, guys? Did you see that? Sorry to all the Clav fans out there. Your boy is cooked, all right? His girlfriend is literally in the IDF. She pulled up the IDF TikTok. She has the login for the IDF TikTok, bro. It's cooked. It's cooked. So we'll see. Are Fuentes and Hunter Biden like buddy now? Like, what's going on there? We're going to react to that debate.
The weak points, I would say, of Protestant theology, evangelical theology, is that it's very susceptible to that. Not to say that the Roman Catholic Church or even amongst the Orthodox Church there aren't people that are susceptible to the same types of subversion, but I think it's a lot more difficult when you have an ancient historic type of church that has certain structural integrity and normativity to it.
Right.
Guys, this is a point I've made many times. This is so important. Only Orthodoxy has the perfect balance between centralization and decentralization. All right? Rome is the ultimate embodiment of centralized authority to the extent that it is easily infiltrated. All you have to do is infiltrate one dude. Protestantism, on the other side, is the ultimate example of decentralization to the point where it has no grounding. And that's why you have Protestantism being hijacked. The low church guys got hijacked for dispensationalism. The high church guys got hijacked for modernism. They have transgender bishops. Only Orthodoxy has the perfect balance between centralization and decentralization. And it's via the patriarchs, of which we have 9. In the first millennium, we had 5. As the church grew, we added patriarchs. The patriarchs have to all get together to have a binding decision on the entire church, just as the church did in Acts chapter 15. Guys, this is the only ecclesiological system that works, is the Orthodox one.
Billy Bob Strip Mall Church, right, doesn't have.
Imagine the sensation, if you will, of going to sleep feeling like you're floating, then waking up rested. There is a sense of continuity.
There is. There's also, if you have the attitude of a standard sort of Protestant evangelical person, there's nothing in history settled, because every generation kind of has to reinvent the wheel. They have to redo all the same controversies and crises all over again, because they could have all been wrong. Nothing is settled, right? Because for Protestant evangelical Christianity, the Bible and the apostles are kind of like the end. I know that a lot of Protestants would say, well, we like Athanasius, we like, St. Augustine or whoever. But when you actually go and read them, they have bishops, they have relics, they have the Eucharist, they have all these elements that don't align with the Protestant Reformation. So I was an avid Calvinist. I was super into John Calvin and all that stuff when I was a younger guy. And it was unsettling, to read these guys and realize, well, they don't.
The bridge from Reformed to Orthodox has to be studied, bro. There's so many people that are Reformed that become Orthodox. I was Reformed. I was a hardcore Calvinist. And actually, I've said this to you guys many times. It was reading St. Augustine. Again, St. Augustine, not only what he says about apostolic succession and how he uses that as an argument against the heretics, right? Not only that, but also St. Augustine explicitly says on multiple occasions that you can be regenerated and justified and still fall away. You can't reconcile that with Calvinism, bro. That's irreconcilable with Calvinism.
Teach Calvinism, so what am I going to do here? I either not be a Christian, or I can align myself with whatever the first 1,000 years of Christianity actually is. And I say the first 1,000 years too, because Catholics and Orthodox share that first 1,000 years. So we both have that in common. So I think that narrows it down. It's either going to be Roman Catholicism or it's going to be Orthodoxy. But
what about Orthodoxy struck you as non-Calvinist? Like, what are the differences, the big differences?
So, Calvinism is not just predestination and the sort of strict soteriology or salvation doctrines. It's also iconoclasm, which ends up, I think, affecting one's view of art and aesthetics.
Idol smashing.
Correct. And I was a very avid sort of iconoclastic.
Guys, this is something I noticed when I was in Greece. It's so sad how in America, we're effectively like iconoclasts. Like, it's just so sad how we've neglected the material beauty, right? Christ consecrated the material when he incarnated as the image of the living God, guys. Christ is the icon of the living God. And thus, when he incarnated, right, he consecrated, he sanctified material, which is why you go in Greece, guys. There's icons everywhere. You go into the ice cream shop and there's icons of Christ and the Holy Theotokos and all of the saints. Guys, it's so beautiful. I wish one day we can have that here in America.
Calvinist when I was young. It's also very rigid in terms of its view of social structure, church and state. The more I read the church fathers, the more I got into that kind of a theology. I realized that like Calvinistic sort of republicanism doesn't really match up with Byzantine imperialism or monarchy, the traditional views of the church's take on governance.
The Byzantine Empire was a theocracy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, pretty much. What's interesting is that there are...
Yes and no, right? Because you still had the church and state were separate entities, right? They weren't the same entity, right? And that's usually, when people hear theocracy, that's usually what they think. They think like, oh yeah, like they are literally the same thing. Separation of church and state, all it means is that they're just not the same thing. They're two different entities. All right, that doesn't mean that there's not influence of one over the other, particularly influence of the church over the state, right? Which is why you have examples in church history like where St. Ambrose cuts off Emperor St. Theodosius from communion because he unalived a bunch of civilians in a riot. To put the riot down, he was overly violent. So St. Ambrose said, bet, and he excommunicated him. And guess what? Emperor St. Theodosius repents, right? That is the perfect model, guys. That's the perfect model. You want your society to be so Christianized that it would be political suicide for an emperor to ever disobey the church.
Spheres, right? So you have basically, if you think about the Byzantine double-headed eagle, that symbol is one body of the people, but church and state as two separate heads. So there's spheres of authority, but one body that they share, which is the people. So, and then the West, to a degree, had this until the Middle Ages, when you get sort of a rise of the 11th century papacy, which becomes also the state. So you get a papal state and a sort of under Pope.
That actually is a theocracy. That is a theocracy. When you literally have, like, the Pope is also a political leader, right? And that's found nowhere in the first, really, I mean, at least the first 800 years of church history.
Dictatus Papae is the famous document that says the church is also a state now.
That's also an insane document. Dictatus Papae, guys, is like literally like it is God giving Rome over to their pride. It literally states that popes automatically become saints. Do you know how insane that is? Anyone who knows anything about church history, it says that popes automatically become saints just by being a pope.
Until that time, the norm was church and states were working in unison. Symphonia is what it's called in the Greek. So that's what I had to grapple with. But Calvinism really doesn't see it that way. It's more like it favors republicanism. There were famous battles between, in England, for example, the Presbyterians and the monarchists. So they actually had a huge fight within the history of the English Reformation as to whether they would be Anglican sort of monarchists or whether they would be Presbyterian Republican Calvinists. So that was a famous Reformation battle. But long story short, again, Calvinism, I think, is just, it's antithetical to the first 1,000 years of Christianity, not so much because of those aesthetic or cultural issues. It's also Christologically errant in that the whole idea of what salvation is ultimately one's legal standing in terms of what's called justification by faith alone or penal substitutionary atonement. This idea that you're justified by God through a sort of notional acceptance of a set of ideas, and then God's attitude towards you changes. So it's dispositional, but it's not focused on an actual ontological change in the person. Orthodox theology is very different.
Yeah, this is a crucial aspect, guys. And all these debates about PSA, someone was asking earlier about it. Guys, if you neglect, right, if you neglect that there's an ontological change, like, that is not orthodox. Like, there is an ontological change. That is theosis, right? There is a change to us in our ontology, right? It's not just this forensic declarative, righteousness. That's not it. And that's the Reformed understanding. No, it is a ontological change in yourself.
Disposition is based not on purely legal stance, but on your actual ontological change. So a metaphysical change in you versus a dispositional attitude. So maybe we don't get too heavy into philosophy, but
I do want to. What's the difference between the two?
Basically, there's an idea in the Middle Ages called nominalism. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Okay, so nominalism is the idea that there are only names to things, not essences. So there's no human nature. There's no dog nature. When we talk about natures or classes or sets of things, we're not giving an ontological or metaphysical status. We're just simply classing things together linguistically in a set. The Middle Ages in the ancient world, the time of Paul or the church fathers, they thought very differently. They thought that things have natures, they have essences. And so the words aren't just terms or nominal nameism. They actually describe what's really there in them metaphysically. Okay. So there is human nature. And in Orthodox theology, Christ assumes—
Who would deny that?
In the Middle Ages, it begins with people like William of Ockham. So Ockham is the first nominalist. And
the man with the razor.
Exactly. He's known for that. And he challenges some kind of established ideas of it's called essentialism, that things have essences. And so he also goes up against this idea of universals, that there's no such thing as a universal class or essence of a thing. And that had been kind of the norm since Plato and Aristotle as well. But so you get a denial of essentialism and essences, and then you get another guy named Gabriel Biel, and he's very influential on Martin Luther. And so when the Reformation kicks off, there's this debate about how could you be called righteous if you're not in fact righteous. So if as a human being, you are menstrual rags, as Isaiah says, as the Reformer said, then how could God call you righteous without being a liar? Well, enter in nominalism, and nominalism is able to say, because things don't actually have essences, they just have names. And so if God calls you that, you are that legally, even though in actual fact you're wicked. So and Luther was very happy to utilize that nominalistic approach. And by the way, this is not just my theory. There's famous Lutheran scholars. There's a book called Harvest of Medieval Theology by Heiko Obermann. And the whole thesis of that book by a Lutheran is that, Luther had to use nominalism. So we're also, though, moving away, not just from theological squabbles, but the idea that things have natures. And this is how we get to David Hume and Kant and these Enlightenment figures, which give us the, scientific revolution, supposedly. This is how we get to, there's no male and female. So you can see kind of the logical train here. If things don't have essences, well, then they don't actually have genders, right? Objectively, because everything's just a name. So I can just name myself he, him, or z. It,
and guess
right?
what else you get? Guess what else you get? There's no such thing as race. You also get that. I'll pull up the St. Seraphim Rose quote to show you guys.
I'm not trying to go too fast or too far in the sense of like theology, but I'm saying there is an ideological sort of progression that you can get from nominalism to where we are now with postmodernism, and then with essentially.
It's interesting that an adult could believe in something like that. I mean, having lived your life, known people, known animals, seen nature, and arrive at the conclusion that nothing has an essence. Everything is just what we call it. Like that flies in the face of your experience. It has to, right?
What's that saying that you have to be an academic to be really stupid?
Yeah,
right?
I guess that's right.
Yeah. To be indoctrinated into believing some sort. I remember Terence McKenna. Do you remember the psychonaut Terence McKenna? I remember reading it one time, and he said something like,
"This is basically exactly what St. Seraphim Rose has said, guys. I've said this multiple times. Hey, welcome. Someone said, here to learn about Eastern Orthodoxy. Didn't know it was a thing until last year. Welcome. I'm an Orthodox channel. I talk mostly about politics. I'm a far-right individual. I care about America. I love America. I'm an American nationalist. I'm also an Orthodox Christian. Today, we are reacting to Dyer, one of the top Orthodox apologists going on, Tucker Carlson. But St. Seraphim Rose says this: we have one particular idea right now that's taking possession of people. These socialists, by the way, prior to this quote, in the full text, he is talking about Marxism. He's kind of giving like a rundown on Marxism. And he says, these socialists were talking about a great new utopian age which is going to come when all distinctions of class and race and religion and so forth are abolished. There will be a great new society, they said, when everybody is equal. This idea, of course, was based originally upon Christianity, but it distorted Christianity and amounted to its opposite. So St. Seraphim Rose is saying, guys, that the Marxists are pushing for this utopian age where there are no distinctions, there's no race, there's no class, there's no gender, there's not even religion, there's nothing. That's basically what Jay is talking about, how you get from nominalism to the modern state where gender doesn't exist, race doesn't exist, nothing exists. It's all fake and gay. Just kidding. They wouldn't say that because they'd probably think it's homophobic or something. I'm not afraid of gay people. I just don't want them to be allowed. You know what I mean?
This is all just magical thinking. If you take the shroom, you're going to see that things don't have essences, that things just have names, and you just change the name.
and I'm like, that's the gender idea right there.
Christians ought to be safe in the Holy Land of all places, but they are not. Keep in mind, the gender insanity is just the most obvious.
But it has a precedent in this theology, this theology debate.
That's amazing. I've never heard that before. Huh. I'm sorry to hear that about Luther, who I've always loved. There's a lot to love about Luther.
He's a character,
for sure. He
would actually chase the devil away with farts, which I think is great.
Quite a robust man and a happy family life and everything about him I like. But that is impossible to defend. It just flies in the face of reality.
Yeah, and even modern scholarship in the Protestant world. There's a great book by Alistair McGrath out of England. I think he's Anglican. It's called Justitia Dei. And his book was kind of a landmark in Protestants coming to the table and saying, okay, look, Luther's doctrine of salvation is not in the first 1,500 years, unfortunately.
So the understanding of salvation that preceded the Reformation was that people had to be changed in their essence in order to be saved.
Yes. So there's an actual participation in what Orthodox theology calls the uncreated energies. So we believe that God has infinite divine energies and operations, attributes, as it's called in the West. And for Orthodox theology, and this is the patristic teaching as well, we participate in that. So we're not just changing a legal status. We're actually participating in the life of God himself, which when you go back and you read the New Testament, you're like, oh, actually, well, that makes more sense, because Jesus says in John 17 that he came to give us a share in the glory that he had with the Father before the foundation of the world. So divine glory can't be a creature. And so Jesus is equating grace.
So you guys may have missed what he just said there. So this book was also crucial. This is a book that's crucial in a lot of people in their conversion from the Protestant traditions to Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. And it's because it's literally a Protestant admitting that Luther's understanding of justification is just not there. It's just not found in the first 1,000 years. So that's why a lot of people read that book, written by a Protestant scholar, and they convert to Orthodoxy or
with divine
Catholicism.
glory. So unless you think God has created parts, which would be polytheism or some form of idolatry, uncreated grace has to be a reality that's a participable thing.
Well, Jesus promises that the Holy Spirit will flow into people and change them.
Right.
And that happens.
Spirit's not a creature, because then you would be anti-Trinitarian. So absolutely, this is why Peter says in his epistle, right, that we become partakers of the divine nature. So very strong language in the New Testament and the epistles for what we call theosis in the Orthodox Church. Paul says, for example, in Thessalonians, that it is the dunamis, or the power of God, that is at work in him. So the actual power of God, which can't be a created thing or a created grace, which unfortunately, even in Latin Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, created grace becomes a normative thing, where what you're getting is just another form of created. The Orthodox Church is saying, no, the incarnation itself tells us that the uncreated.
Yeah, this dude saying that Catholic aesthetics better than Orthodox, bro. Come on, give me a break. Like, when's the last time the Catholic Church built anything like the insane cathedral in Romania, bro? Here's the thing: historically, they're like on the same level, right? Historically, like Roman Catholic aesthetics and Orthodox aesthetics were both fire. In the modern day, bro, the Roman Catholics aren't doing anything. They aren't building anything beautiful. It's all ugly. It looks Protestant. You go to their Latin Mass, bro, they don't even barely have any icons. It's just like statues. It's like a few statues, no icons. Orthodox Church, you could have a totally, like a broke Orthodox Church, guys. It'll still be decked out in icons. It'll be gorgeous. The cathedral in Romania mogs anything that the Roman Catholics have built in the recent centuries.
United itself to human nature and incarnation, and that Jesus deified the human nature that he assumed with his own immortality, grace, and uncreated energy.
The role of the Bible in the Protestant world versus the Orthodox world, you described it this way, I think. You said in Protestant Christianity, the Bible is seen as like a tool, as what's a guide. Of course, it's the guide, the only guide, really, and it is a devotional.
Yeah.
But in the Orthodox Church, it's a liturgical document.
Correct.
What does that mean?
The Torgos has to do with the Greek word of offering, or offering of thanks, offering of praise. But it's also in the Hebrew tradition, we think that was proto-Christianity, the ancient Hebrew text. It was part of, for example, David's Psalms. Those were Psalms that David wrote to be sung at the temple liturgy.
Right.
So liturgy is a sort of structured form of worship that Orthodox, Roman Catholics, Anglicans, Episcopalians, they have a very structured form of worship that is called liturgy. But originally it just means sort of offering. And even in Pauline epistles, like the book of Hebrews, towards the end of it in chapter 13, Paul talks about Christians have an altar that they eat from, that the Jews that serve the tabernacle have no right to eat from, because our altar is the true altar, which is thus a liturgical altar. That very chapter, he discusses the liturgical thanks and offering at that altar. So from the earliest days, Christianity had this sort of altar-based form of worship. Again, another Reformation distinctive is that they begin to move away from the idea of an altar towards a table, right? So you have sort of a desacralizing of the worship space to not be a Eucharistic offering, but a shared meal, and we're not totally opposed to the idea of it being a shared meal, but it's first and foremost a worship offering. If you go back to Abraham built an altar. God is always worshipped at an altar, at least the biblical God. So for us, the Reformation then represents a form of turning away from that.
By the way, guys, Craig Trulia has pointed out they found like altars in Pompeii. They found like Christian altars in Pompeii, right? So like this was a very, very early Christian practice, was to have altars, right? And this is something that's contested by Protestants, but yet modern archaeology, guys, we continue to find, the more we discover about the early church, the more Orthodox it is. Right? We find churches and synagogues with icons. We find altars. We find older and older statues and icons, et cetera, right? So the more we discover, and this has always been the case in Christian history. Let me give you a great example, okay? For the longest time, there was no archaeological evidence of the town of Nazareth, let alone a synagogue being in that area. So where Nazareth was supposed to be, they were like, first of all, this place doesn't even exist. Then, and also there were no synagogues over there. So this is total, the New Testament made this up. We got laughed out of scholarly rooms because of this. Guys, not only did they find evidence of Nazareth, the town, they also found a synagogue there. This was recently. This was in the last couple decades. So the church's tradition, and this is why, as we're discovering more and more icons, older and older icons, Michael Garton's book is phenomenal on this, where he talks about the old icons and the first century. You guys should go watch. There's a documentary about this that he helped put together with Craig Trulia. And it goes over all of those ancient icons. So definitely pick up that book. I'd recommend it, because the more we discover about early Christianity, the more orthodox it is.
It's a form of sort of Judaizing. It's a form of returning to a form of rabbinical theology. And many of the reformers were actually very influenced by rabbinic theology, by the Talmud even. So the Reformation has a stream of influences, Renaissance humanism, all those things play into that. And it's just very...
Well, Luther was not in that category, though, no?
He was not interested in rabbinic theology, but he was influenced by what's a text called the Theologia Germanica, which was a Neoplatonic text. And so there's also some evidence that scholars have pulled up that suggests that Luther might have had an interest in Hermeticism. I'm not saying that dominates his idea, but more so with Calvin and some of the Swiss reformers, they were a little more directly influenced by rabbinic theology and Talmudism, but not so much Luther, no. Luther was very he didn't even like Moses. He said, I'd like to punch Moses' teeth out. So Luther didn't even like the Old Testament at times. But again, he's a boisterous sort of,
he certainly was
satirical character at times. So it's hard to know exactly.
The most hilarious theologian in history.
He was very hilarious. So it's hard to know exactly when he's always being literally, might just be joking around. But no, I don't mean to mischaracterize, because I know Luther wrote about the Jews and their lies. That's a famous text that he wrote. So I'm aware of that. But just in terms of the general, trends of the Reformation.
Speaking of, guys, you guys saw my video on Instagram yesterday. We have St. John Chrysostom. We have St. John Chrysostom against the Jews, which is now available on Underground Canon. Guys, it's sold out, but you can now you can at least pre-order it now. We already sold out of all of our copies. That's how fast sold. I literally posted that video yesterday. We immediately sold out. Go to this link and check out the different books they have here, guys. undergroundcanon.com/Ben. They have all kinds of good stuff on here, including what's being referenced right now. They even have Luther's text. So maybe you do want to check out what Luther has to say on the Jews. You can pick that up. Or like I said, Homilies Against the Jews, which you can get on a pre-order right now, because we are completely sold out. We sold out in one day. But yeah, go check this, guys. There's so many books on here that you really can't get anywhere else, or at least you have a hard time getting anywhere else. Undergroundcanon.com/Ben, and use code Ben at the checkout to get a discount, and let them know I sent you. But those guys are great. The owner's also inquiring into Orthodoxy, so Lord willing, we'll have an Orthodox king running that bookstore soon.
Outside of Luther, and
he loves Codriano. Codriano is his favorite historical figure, at least modernly. He loves Codriano as much as I do.
Calvin, Zwingli, Melanchthon, even later Lutherans were very involved in the founding of Rosicrucianism. Johann Andre is believed by some scholars to be the author of the Rosicrucian Manifesto. I forget exactly what it's called, but so that is there, and a lot of that has to do with Kabbalistic ideas.
Who are the Rosicrucians?
This was an Enlightenment era secret society of sorts, which in the 1600s, 1700s, there was a lot of these that were popping up everywhere, because you still had, in Protestant countries, you had certain laws that would, and in Catholic countries as well, they would forbid participation in secret societies. They would forbid, practicing of the occult in various ways. But you also had court alchemists and people that would kind of, like John Dee, he was the court astrologer to the Queen. So they would kind of do these things on the down low, secretly. And so you get a rise of these secret societies. This is where some of the first speculative Masonic lodges start to pop up in the 1500s, 1600s in Europe. But you also had a very interesting confluence of Hermetic and Kabbalistic groups that were popping up, particularly Spanish rabbis that were very popular in Spain seem to be involved in some of the rise of Kabbalistic influence in the West. And that, I think, contributes in part to the Rosicrucians who, according to, there's a great book by Dame Frances Yates called Rosicrucian Enlightenment. She actually argues that the Enlightenment itself was heavily influenced by Rosicrucian ideology. So they were Neoplatonists. They were into magic,
A
alchemy.
lot of problems with the Enlightenment, guys. Jay does a really good job exposing that.
So they were really interested in the idea of transmuting metals, into the Philosopher's Stone, which some people thought was a real thing you could do, and others thought, well, that's just an allegory for how to undergo transformation into your better self or to become God in a literal sense, not in the sense of Orthodox theology, but so all of these sort of different strains and strands
But basically,
in the Hermetic world.
witchcraft.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah,
Huh.
a form of it. But again, that's all very diverse. I think in the case of John Dee, for example, he's the first 007. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, so the 007, which is 2 balls and a cane, which is Tubal Cain, that's how John Dee would sign his secret letters to the Queen, because he was one of the influences on James Bond. So that's where we get 007 from. And Ian Fleming consciously took that from John Dee. But my thesis, and other people think this as well, is that when he created this sort of magical angel language that he called Enochian after Enoch, it was just a way to do spy codes and ciphers. He might have actually done some rituals, but it was also very useful as a tool for sending messages to Elizabeth that other people couldn't decode.
Inflation makes credit card statements particularly scary. You work 40, 50 hours a week just to buy groceries and gas, things you used to be able to afford without thinking that much about. So in the Orthodox tradition in the church, the Bible is read aloud.
Yeah.
By the way, guys, this is a crucial point, and a big reason I converted was because I realized that, hey, this Christianity of like sitting and reading your Bible every morning, that is not the Christianity of every single Christian who lived before the printing press was invented. Guess what their Christianity consisted of? It consisted of going to liturgy, hearing the divine holy scriptures read aloud, and receiving the sacraments, receiving absolution, receiving the Eucharist. This was the Christianity of every single Christian who lived until the printing press. Sitting down, and guys, we have a huge privilege in the modern day to be able to sit down and read the Holy Scriptures every day. We have an amazing privilege to be able to do that most Christians in history did not. They were lacking nothing, guys. They were lacking nothing. Those Christians in those eras, they were lacking nothing because they were going to liturgy a lot of times every day. This is something the West got wrong. The West, so you have basically in the East, you never have this develop where you have sort of like this limited participation in the Eucharist. In the West, you had this where like lay people could only partake in the Eucharist like once a year and things of that nature. You don't have this in the East. In fact, the Didache, I believe the Didache says you should partake in the Eucharist 3 to 5 times a week. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Pretty sure it says 3 to 5 times. So you have basically the peasant class of people that were partaking in the Eucharist every single day. Every single day. To this guy that keeps asking me about PSA, I don't speak on PSA. I already said what I believe, okay? My problems with PSA are when it's a declarative only, and if you say that Christ went to Hades to pay our penalty. Those are 2 massive problems with the Protestant understanding of PSA. I am not speaking on it further. I don't talk on the issue. I don't care, okay? I don't care. I talk mostly about politics, all right? I don't get into these debates on like PSA and original sin within the Orthodox Church. I really don't care that much, guys. It's not my thing, all right? It's not my thing. So these people that try to draw us into these different camps and the Dyerites, the Latinizer, all this bullshit, like whatever, dude. I just don't care. I just don't care.
Orthodox encouraged to read the Bible on their own?
My people are being replaced. They're being genocided in my own country. That's what I'm taught. That's what I'm focused on. All right. I'm focused on stopping that. I'm focused on exposing the JQ, Jewish power. Right. Do I agree the Mets are peak? I have no idea. I don't know anything about baseball. I know you're trolling. Guys, on that note, I cannot wait till Goey Ball is back. Goyball is going to be back in just a couple weeks. I can't wait.
I mean, St. John Chrysostom actually said famously that the laity have more need of reading the scriptures than even the monks or the priests, because monks and priests live in the liturgy, which, for those that don't know, in the Orthodox Church, basically every aspect of the liturgy and the liturgical calendar is Bible. It is scripture constantly. It's like every aspect of it. And so Chrysostom's argument was laity need to be in the Bible more than they do because they live it. So if you're not in the liturgy all the time, like those people are, the best substitute is the little church, which Chrysostom calls the house. So the household is, in the Orthodox idea, kind of a little mini church. So absolutely, we got to be in the Bible all the time. And that shows that we're not anti-Bible, like a lot of sort of Protestant evangelicals think.
So one of the reasons there was a Reformation in the first place is because the Catholic Church over time began to hide the Bible from Christians, and it was not published in the local language in Europe. It was in Latin. It was the Vulgate, and Luther's great breakthrough was to publish it in German, to translate it himself into German. Did the Orthodox Church do the same?
Yes. In fact, this is one of the differences between the pre-Vatican II Roman Church and the Orthodox Church, is that the Orthodox always put it in the vernacular. Everything. The liturgy, homilies are supposed to be in the vernacular of the people. In fact, the Vulgate itself was originally the vulgar Bible. It was the Bible of the people. And so, yeah, I think there was an element to where the Latin Church, the Roman Church, had just sort of solidified into a kind of a tradition that, and it's not inherently wrong to maintain that linguistic heritage, but it's also possible to put it in the vernacular for the people.
So I think what he's referencing, so in the West, you have this development, right, of like Latin. Latin is treated as if it had a unique grace attached to it, right? There was a unique grace attached to Latin. That was how the West viewed it. The East just didn't see this that way, right? The East, it would translate things. That's why we have, we have these different saints that are from these different traditions that are writing in their language, right? They're writing in Russian, or they're writing in Greek if that's the tradition they come from, right? And so what he's referencing here is we don't attach a unique grace to a particular language. And this is why, I'm definitely in favor of long-term us having English liturgy here in America, because the liturgy should be culturally appropriate to the place in which it resides, right? And so that's why my show is American Orthodoxy, guys, for this exact reason, because I want English liturgy, I want American Orthodoxy, I want American culture to be Christianized and to become Orthodox. That's what I'm advocating for.
I mean, that's the whole idea behind translating the Bible into the languages of the people so that they can understand it. But that is one of the differences pre-Vatican II. But interestingly, after Vatican II, there were both Protestant and Orthodox influences on the reforms of the Roman Catholic Church, and thus Rome then began to emphasize the vernacular after Vatican II.
You said you were an iconoclast, a smasher of idols. Orthodoxy famously incorporates icons, paintings on wood, into its worship. What is that?
This is, again, a huge misunderstanding that we believe is part of proto-Christianity. It's part of Hebrew proto-Christianity. So when you go back to the book of Kings, when you go to the book of Exodus, and you see the way that the tabernacle and then later the temple are described, they are tremendously ornate. You've got gold images of angels, and you've got the Ark of the Covenant with, angelic imagery on it. So we don't believe that real Old Testament Christianity or Old Testament Judaism, you could say, not rabbinic Judaism. We think that's something different that developed in the 4th and 5th century.
What is something different?
Yeah. But proto-Christianity or the Hebrew tradition was not iconoclastic. They were against idols, but not all imagery. In fact, and this is something that really changed my mind when I was a Calvinist, if you think about it, the Bible is a book, but words are just iconographic versions of images. They're a type of image.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more I thought about
written word, yeah.
The more I thought about that, it's like, well, you can't actually say all images are bad, because capital FATHER, that's a type of an image. In the Orthodox Church, we don't typically image God the Father. We think that, as Jesus says in the book of John to the Pharisees, he says, no one has seen the Father at any time. And he's quizzing the Pharisees there because he's saying, so who do you think Moses was interacting with on Mount Sinai if no one saw the Father? Because it says Moses saw God face to face. Jesus is basically saying, I was talking to Moses. I'm God. That's why the Pharisees want to stone him in that chapter, because he's saying he's the face of God that was interacting with Moses. So this is why the book of Colossians, the book of Hebrews, call Jesus the icon, I-K-O-N in the Greek, the image of the Father. This enrages the Pharisees. So we think that iconography directly flows out of the incarnation, the Son being the image of the Father. Thus, throughout the early church, you have the development of the liturgy, even in the 1st and 2nd century. And this has been shown through archaeological evidence, through people who study liturgy. They're called liturgists. even Protestant Anglican liturgists note that the early church had altars, they had imagery, even synagogues in the 1st and 2nd century. One of the famous cases is the Dura Europa synagogue in Syria. I think it's from the early 200s. It's lined with images, paintings of Old Testament scenes and imagery. So
and another reason, maybe he mentions this, maybe he doesn't, but another reason for this, right, is because the people were illiterate, right? It was to bring to life these stories that were found in the Holy Scriptures, right? So they couldn't read it themselves, but they could see via iconography, they could see and understand, right, that these stories were indeed true, that they really actually happened, right? They're not fairy tales, right? So it was a visual educational tool for the laity.
Our church, if you look at the Dyer Europa synagogue, is the most natural development of if Christianity was going to open up to the Gentiles and it was coming out of the temple and synagogue liturgical system, is exactly what it would look like. It would look like an Orthodox church, and lo and behold, that's what Orthodox churches look like. And by the way, I remember 2023, my priest, who's a great Russian Orthodox priest, Father Vladimir, he took us on a pilgrimage to Italy. And I was like, why are we going to Italy? That's not Rome. Well, there's 1,000 years of Christianity, prior to the rise of the medieval papacy in Italy. And there's tons of Orthodox places that you could go to, right, in Italy. And so we went to the catacombs in Rome. And lo and behold, when the Christians were persecuted and they're underground in the catacombs in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, by the way, you can never see all the catacombs. Like, we spent a whole day just in one of the catacombs in Rome. There's altars, there's images that they painted in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century. So even the catacomb church had liturgy, had imagery. Plenty of examples of this. The church fathers also
not only that, guys, but there's literally, not only were the catacombs had the icons, they also had intercessory prayers. They had intercessory prayers written underneath the icons. So you literally have the doctrine of Nicaea too, right there in the 1st and 2nd century Roman catacombs
as well. So those are huge, I would say, differences between, and remember, the people couldn't read back then. Most of the Roman Empire was illiterate. So when they would go to these services in the catacombs or wherever, they would be hearing the word of God. That's why Peter says, this is the word of God which was preached to you. Paul says to Timothy, pass on all the things that you heard from me in the presence of many witnesses. So that oral teaching, that oral hearing of the liturgical worship was the norm. And then one of the things that really cracked it for me as a Protestant when I left Protestantism was when I learned that, by the way, I learned this from evangelical scholars. One of the things that developed the canon of the scripture itself in terms of like how the church decided what books go in and which ones don't was what's called the lectionaries. Lectionaries are the daily liturgical readings in the churches. So when the church fathers were having these councils and they were meeting, and the canon of scripture doesn't actually get solidified, at least for the Orthodox church, until the 6th and 7th century, they would say, okay, which ones do we have a tradition?
Which again, Protestants will use that as a talking point to try to refute Orthodoxy, not realizing our understanding of the canon is a tiered system and it's a liturgical text anyway, so it's not problematic for us. It's not problematic for us that it wasn't solidified until the Council of Trullo. It's a huge problem for Protestants that it took so long for the church to solidify the canon. Under a sola scriptura mentality, how is that possible? That you don't even have a closed canon, right? Until the Council of Trullo. Because Carthage, yeah, that sort of closed the canon in the West, but you still have in the East, right? It didn't really close it in the West. But even if we granted that, you still have the problem of the other half of the church doesn't have a closed canon because they don't accept Carthage until Trullo, right? So this is a huge problem for Protestants. The fact that in church history you don't have a closed canon. For Orthodox, it's not a problem because we have a tiered understanding of Scripture, of the Holy Scriptures and the canon, and we understand it's liturgical, not a guide to your daily life like the Protestants like to say.
As Paul wrote or Matthew wrote, which ones are in the daily lectionaries. And if you're a Protestant, you believe in sola scriptura, the idea that liturgy and liturgical tradition play this huge role in the determination of the canon make it very difficult to say that, we're based on Scripture alone, sola scriptura.
So Orthodoxy is not based on just the Bible.
No, we would say the Orthodox Church is based on the idea of apostolic succession, that the apostles appointed successors in various bishoprics.
Guys, the church was operating for decades while the New Testament is being written. How can it possibly be under a sola scriptura mentality when the New Testament is being written for decades while the church is operating perfectly fine? And then this carries on because, again, you don't even get the 27-book New Testament canon in one spot until St. Athanasius, the tail end of the 4th century. So for 300 years, the church is operating with no issue. That's why you have St. Irenaeus, guys. St. Irenaeus goes as far as to say that even if the apostles did not leave any writings, the church would be fine because they have succession back to the apostolic sees. That's what St. Irenaeus says, who is a disciple of St. Polycarp, who is a direct disciple of St. John. I go over all this in my debate with Redeem Zoomer. You can find it right here on my channel. Go to my live streams. And I debated Redeem Zoomer, and I reacted to it. Go check that out.
Bishoprics and sees throughout the Roman Empire. It's based on the tradition, which could include the lives of the saints. It could include liturgy. It could include all kinds of rites of the church fathers, canons of the councils. Those are traditions, and the Bible. So all of those elements go into what the basis of the Orthodox Church is. Whereas, in the Protestant world, you have elected elders or something like that, but you don't have this sort of 3-tiered stool of apostolic succession, tradition, and Bible altogether.
What are the practical differences as a weekly communicant in an Orthodox church? How is that different from being a Catholic or Protestant?
Well, certainly we would have more similarities to a Roman Catholic than most Protestants or evangelicals. There might be a high church Protestant or Anglican.
Although these days, and Jay would agree with this, these days with Novus Ordo, bro, these high church Protestants have more in common with the Novus Ordo. And some of these high church Protestants have older liturgy than the Novus Ordo. The Novus Ordo is brand new. It's brand new, right? It's like it's from the Vatican II era, right? So, and that's their normative liturgy. Like 98% of global Catholic churches are the Novus Ordo, right? So these Latin Mass, Divine, and Eastern Orthodox, Byzantine Catholic liturgy are extremely rare. Extremely rare. They're way overblown because everyone's like, oh, you can always become Eastern Catholic. It's like, well, there's not very many Eastern Catholic parishes. There's even less Latin Mass parishes now that you have the SSPX excommunicated, right? So honestly, the Novus Ordo has way more in common with like these modernized Protestants. They have guitars, they have screens, which, by the way, a lot of the Coptics also have those things. Only the Eastern Orthodox are really upholding the ancient liturgy, at least normatively, throughout the entire church.
Some similarities with Orthodox Church, but I think...
Thanks, guys, for the super chats, as always. I'll go over all super chats at the end.
For the Orthodox world, fasting is a lot more integrated into what we do than most.
Fasting?
Yeah. There's a lot of fasting days in the Orthodox church calendar.
Well, what does that mean for you?
Just abstaining from certain foods. Lent is a little more rigorous for the Orthodox than it is for...
Why fasting?
Well, we think that Jesus and the apostles and people like John the Baptist kind of set the tone for retaining an element of asceticism in the church. So obviously some people could take that to the extreme. We're not Hindu yogis, sitting out under a tree trying to roll around in poop or whatever.
Hey, they're asking me in the comments, you guys are asking me about the Packers. Guys, the Packers are winning the Super Bowl. I go into every season thinking the Packers are going to go undefeated and we're going to win the Super Bowl. All right? That's just how I am as a fan. I'm that type of fan. Okay? I'm that type of fan. All right? So that's what I think. I think the Packers are going to go undefeated. We're going to win the North again because Caleb Williams is cursed now that he was on the Madden cover. That's so ridiculous, by the way, that he's on the Madden cover. But anyways, I'm not seething. The fact that Rodgers was never on the Madden cover is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. But anyways, I'm not coping. Packers are going undefeated.
But we do think there is virtue in training the body to be subject to the will so that the body's desires and passions don't control us. So that's why fasting has an important role. Basically learning to control the passions is what that's part of.
How often do you fast?
I am not the best at fasting because I have a really weird gut biome issues, so I don't fast as much as I should. It's very challenging. But there's also people there's nuances.
Yeah, his priest gives him like other ways to fast other than food because of his health complications. I've met up with Jay a couple times. This dude eats so much freaking meat, dude. Like we go to like barbecue, bro just gets like an entire plate of meat. Like he's basically on like the carnivore diet. So yeah, he has a hard time with fasting because of his health complications. But his priest gives him other ways to fast, and that's usually how it goes. If you have health issues, there'll be other ways that you can put to death your passions, right? Which, by the way, we just finished. Oh my goodness, bro. We just finished this Apostles' fast on the old calendar. Bro, that was brutal. Listen, guys, in the Orthodox Church, it's like half the year is fasting. It's freaking brutal. It's brutal. I'm terrible at it, by the way. I'm so bad at fasting. It is not easy.
Or medical issues. But the Orthodox Church fasts quite a bit, usually from various meats and stuff like that. But it's not just fasting that's different. I think for the Orthodox Church, it's not just about food. Fasting is also almsgiving, because you're sort of, it's self-denial.
This is a point I made on Ubi's show, guys. Is I really think that the fasting rules need to be a little bit updated, because to get your protein, bro, you have to spend so much money, because you're buying shrimp, you're buying all this vegan protein, and then if you want the healthy vegan protein that's clean, you got to spend even more money. So, and this is problematic, because what's the whole point of fasting? Well, one of the reasons is almsgiving. So you're supposed to be spending less money, not more money. So in my opinion, like some dry chicken is a better fasting rule. This is just Ben's opinion. All right. Don't take this with a grain of salt. All right. But like some dry chicken, right, with no seasoning and no sauce is a better way to fast than to spend all this money on shrimp or on lobster, which are fast-friendly meals, right? Or clean vegan protein, right? And it's also better. It's also better than spending not as much money, but getting vegan protein that is literally like straight up poison. Absolute, like literally straight up poison that you're putting into your body. So I don't know, man. That's just my opinion.
Not just about diet. It's also, for example, during Lent, it would be appropriate to confess more. It would be appropriate to give more than you normally would. So we make a pretty big deal about things like almsgiving. Whereas, and I'm not saying that other groups don't give, but I think that's stressed a lot more in the Orthodox Church than it is perhaps in Protestant churches or other domains. But I mean, these are just there's immense differences, I would say, between just the, communion is a lot more serious in the Orthodox Church. You don't commune unless you're Orthodox. You can't. Like, we don't have what's called open communion. So
Yep.
Roman Catholic can't come, or Protestant can't come and just commune. Most churches are way more open about that.
Which, by the way, we get criticized for that. We get criticized for that, even though that was the ancient practice, even in Protestantism. You used to have to have a note. As a Presbyterian, you have to have a note from your pastor just to take communion at a different Presbyterian church that you were traveling to at the time. You had to get a note from your pastor, go to the different pastor that you're traveling to, give them the note to be able to take communion. So open communion, this whole like kumbaya session where Baptists and not Lutherans, but Anglicans and Presbyterians and Methodists, they all just open communion with each other. Guess what, guys? That is ahistorical even in Protestantism. The Lutherans are the only ones that really uphold this still. Lutherans have closed communion. A lot of people don't know this. Lutherans have closed communion. You cannot be someone other than a Lutheran and go take communion at a Lutheran church. You can't. They still have the historical Protestant understanding, whereas all these other Protestant denominations have sort of bent the knee. Even Roman Catholic churches, guys, the Novus Ordo, bro, if you are from a apostolic, so Assyrian Church of the East, Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, if you are from any of those traditions, you can take communion at a Roman Catholic church. Which, by the way, Sam Shamoun has said this is why he was attending a Roman Catholic church, because he got to take communion there and the Orthodox Church wouldn't let him. So we're the only ones actually upholding the ancient practice.
Strict in the Orthodox Church in terms of communion. Usually within the liturgy, the priest says, all who are baptized Christians who have prepared themselves through confession may approach the table, because we take it very seriously. We think it is actually, the body, blood, soul, and uncreated energy of Christ. So we don't want to treat that lightly. And I'm not saying that Protestants don't have a reverence for their version of the sacrament, but it's just a lot more serious, I think, in the Orthodox Church than it is elsewhere. But we do have some of the sacramental principles, like confession to a priest, that Protestants don't have. So again, there's a whole milieu of wide scope of differences between.
Everybody wants your attention. Think about all the apps, the shows, the podcasts, the websites that compete for your attention. Everybody, you can't keep up with it. You're probably wasting a lot of your life. Hallow is not a waste of your life. The Hallow app can make your life. Hallow is the world's #1 prayer app and a constant topic of conversation in my family, literally every day at dinner. You should come over. This July, Hallow is releasing a study on saints, figures like St. Paul, Ruth, Joan of Arc, real people, real struggles who wound up turning their lives toward Jesus in a way that saved them forever. Paul, since the religion you described was originally tethered to a government, an empire, how has becoming Orthodox changed your view of government and its role?
That's an interesting question. When I was a Calvinist, I was more like a sort of libertarian, get the state out of everything.
It is the religion of libertarianism, isn't it?
But as I got more into historic Christianity,
it's also changing, by the way, because you have like Dale Partridge and Joel Webbin. These guys are reformed, but they are, nationalist. And I see them as like sort of political allies.
To realize that, well, maybe republicanism isn't like the highest form of government. Like maybe it's not necessarily the best. So, and I'd never read any critiques of, Republican governance and whatnot, but it turns out there've been, quite a few people, especially after scientific revolution, there were conservatives and right-wingers who were writing pretty, I would say, substantial critiques of republicanism. I think even members of royal families were writing pretty good critiques of.
Well, naturally.
Yeah. They have a vested interest in probably that, right?
But there were liberal in the best sense minded people who believed in inalienable rights, who argued that a Republican form of government, self-government, democracy would devolve into tyranny.
True. Plato wrote even back in his day.
Mob rule, guys. It's mob rule. I pointed this out on my appearance on Tim Pool. Guess what? When you have democracy in its purest form, right? I could drive my truck into a little town, and that town could vote to seize my truck. That my truck now belongs to the town. That's democracy, guys. It's mob rule. Democracy in its purest form is just mob rule. That's why it's problematic. That's why the Founding Fathers didn't actually establish a democracy. They established a gatekept system, right, where land-owning men were the only ones who could vote. In my opinion, in the modern day, this either needs to be an IQ gatekept, or an IQ test, or at the very least, net givers in the economy, right? You cannot be getting more from the state than you are giving.
And he was, of course, a proponent of republicanism, but he wrote that the more decentralized in the sense of democracy, he didn't like democracy at all. He thought that would eventually lead to mobocracy and the rule of the passions, because the oligarch in that type of a democratic setting has the incentive to appeal to the biggest number at the lowest basis, lowest common denominator, and then it becomes incumbent upon him to really play on the passions of the mob. So why not debase the people, because they're easier to control, the mob? So there's an incentive that even Plato noticed back then.
I think he writes in the Republic, if this happens, they're going to legalize weed.
They're going to legalize everything to do with butt stuff.
Yep.
So it becomes fake and gay. So he sought, I think, in various ways, even as a pagan philosopher, to try
You guys ever heard the saying, the Greeks invented sex and the Romans added women to it? I heard that from a Greek, okay? It was a Greek that made that joke, all right? So don't attack me, Greeks. I'm sorry, all right? It was a Greek that said the joke. I'm just repeating it. Don't attack me, all right? I love you, Greeks. I love the Greeks. Greeks, you guys are awesome, all right? I just thought it was a funny joke, okay?
Figure out some way to have a society based on sort of objective, almost mathematical principles. By the end of the Republic, it's sort of like you get the impression that he thinks that you need to go study mathematics on the top of a mountain for 20 years, and then you come back and then you sort of instantiate mathematical forms into the society. And it's interesting because later on, by the end of his life, he seems to progress towards more of like a secret society type of governance, because he has this, I think I'm going from memory, maybe the Symposium or the other one, but he argues that there's this Council of Night in IGHT, which is a governance board of like spy chiefs.
Yep.
And so they meet at night because the public's too stupid to know what's going on. So, which is just weird, because it reminds me of like, I remember reading something about Kissinger talking about the wise men, and like, it's like Plato's talking about like Henry Kissinger's form of like secret governance.
And then we devolved to the level of Jeffrey Epstein from Coney Island.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it's all the same thing. It's just Jeffrey Epstein was an idiot, which no one wants to say, but he was, obviously, when you read his writing.
No, it wasn't a psyoped Greek. It was a based Greek. It was a based Greek who loves his Greek heritage that made the joke, all right? I promise. It wasn't a self-hating Greek.
And so it's sort of our version of.
By the way, you guys ever seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding? That is a hilarious movie. I freaking love that movie. The original is so goated. It gets fake and gay literally in the second one, and the third one's even more fake and gay. But the first one is hilarious.
Of that. So I notice that the enthusiasm for liberal democracy, whatever that is, but our system of government that has produced our culture, enthusiasm is waning for that. Like I don't know many people. I don't know anyone who wants dictatorship, just to be clear. But I don't know anybody. I literally don't know anybody who thinks the current system is working. So that suggests it probably won't last.
It wasn't. Oh my gosh, you guys are trolling me. It wasn't a boomer Greek. It was a Gen Z based Greek that made the joke. My goodness, guys, you must be really fun at parties. All right, you must be really fun at parties. All right, it's a joke. Haha, you're supposed to laugh.
So what comes next and what should come next?
I love Greeks. I know Greeks aren't gay. It's funny. It's supposed to be a funny joke. All right. All right. It's okay, guys. It's okay. All right. I love the Greeks. I know you guys aren't gay. Greeks are based. All right.
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that. I mean, I think, again, when you look at Christian history, even in the West or in the Orthodox East, you have a pretty normative tradition of kings and queens, preferably kings, but and that happens through a semi-sacramental service called a coronation service. So, the Orthodox Church always coronated emperors, czars, kings. Some of the most famous, kings in the history of the Orthodox Church, fought massive battles. They went to war. So I think one thing that ties into this idea of a de-Christianizing of the state, which is part and parcel with that sort of tendency in the Calvinist, libertarian type of tradition, the classical liberal ethos, is there was a famous Russian statesman, Papanutiev, who wrote a book, Reflections of a Russian Statesman, around 1890s. And he said...
Got a fellow devil dog in the comments here. What's up, Ben? Just got accepted into flight school post-TBS, currently MESEP. Wait, flight school post-TBS, currently MESEP? You're confusing me. So are you saying that you are a MESEPer, but you already went to TBS, so that means you already graduated because you already commissioned. And then you got accepted into flight school post-TBS? I mean, I've heard of people, my stream is cutting in and out. What are you talking about? Is anybody else seeing my stream cut in and out?